Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about academic peer review. Now, I've done videos about how to give peer review feedback before, but academic peer review is rather a different kettle of horses than the kind of peer review that we tend to do in class, right? So when I teach first-year composition or business writing or whatever it is, we do peer reviews where people will bring in their draft, they will share it with a classmate through whatever mechanism, and they will get feedback on it, right? So on a basic level, that's not inherently different from academic peer review, but there's some major differences. And part of the reason I wanted to talk about this is because this has kind of just been popping up in my social media life of late. So I very recently saw a series of videos by Dan McClellan, and I'll try and remember to link these in the description down below. I saw a series of videos by Dan McClellan responding to arguments by a guy named Wes Huff, who claimed that there is scholarship supporting a particular position, and Huff is not a scholar. McClellan is a scholar, and McClellan has made the point, quite rightly, I think, that all of the things that Huff has pointed to as evidence for his position are not scholarly. That's not to say that they're not right. They may be right, and personally I don't think they are, but that's not the question that I'm interested in here. Additionally, I saw a video by Planner Walk quite recently. Again, link I'll try and remember to put down below. About a report that has been released by the U.S. government that has, let's say, questionable scientific conclusions. And according to Planner Walk, and I haven't double-checked this, so I don't know that this is true, but again, that I'm not concerned necessarily with the veracity of this claim in particular. According to Planner Walk, the peer reviewing of this report was more or less that it was given to people who already agreed with the conclusions that were being drawn. So this, and then there's an image up on the screen right now. This is the other one that I saw recently, where someone on social media clearly has not understood what peer review is or who counts as a peer in terms of peer reviewing scholarship. So, let's be clear about this. So I'll start with terminology. So, scholarly work, peer-reviewed work, scholarship. For scholars, right? People whose professional life is in these fields, in professional fields of knowledge, whether that's scientists, whether that's humanities researchers, people like me, literature and drama scholars, whether that's whatever it is, right? People who work in academic fields. Scholarship, scholarly work, peer-reviewed work are more or less synonymous, and they mean a very specific thing. So, what they mean essentially is, this is going to sound fairly self-evident, but I will explain more about what this means in detail. What this means is that this is work that has gone through the process of peer review prior to publication. Now, there's a lot of very smart stuff out there that does not go through peer review. There's stuff that's self-published, which may have no oversight whatsoever, right? It's just anyone can self-publish as long as you are willing to pay for it, right? So there's that element of it. There are trade publishers, people who publishers who publish books, journals, magazines, etc., that are intended for a popular audience. So things like trade publishers will publish often informative works that may look like scholarship. They may have citations, they may have thorough research, they may have all of the kind of stuff that proper scholarship has, but they don't go through a process of peer review. And I don't think that's a bad thing inherently, right? But part of the thing is trade publications are intended generally for broader consumption. They're often more affordable, they're often more accessible in terms of how they're written, the type of language they use, the approach they take to problems, etc., etc. They're useful for a broader audience. I read a lot of trade publications in my line of work, and I cite them because if I think that they are reliable, right? I don't think it's a bad thing to have a trade publication, because you get people who are very, very, very smart who write them, and you get people obviously who are not as smart who write them, but you can get people who are very, very, very smart who write really, really good things that change the way we think about the world, and it doesn't go through peer review, right? So Naomi Klein, for instance, is one person I really, really like. I really like her work. A lot of her books are, because she's a journalist and not a scholar, a lot of her books are published through trade publishers. And they're very, very smart, very, very insightful. I tend to trust the things that she says, but they don't go through peer review. So there's that. So what do I mean when I say something has gone through peer review? Most times in academia, what we're talking about is a process called double-blind peer review, and that's very important. I have seen single-blind peer review, but that's very, very rare in my experience. So basically, what this involves is that the author, let's say me, I've written an article, or my second book is finally done, whatever it is, right? So I've written something. We'll call it an article for simplicity's sake. Well, I've written an article. I send it to a publisher, say PMLA, which is the top scholarly journal in English, modern languages, etc., right? So I send it to them. What they do, what the editors of PMLA then do, is they will send it to two other people, usually two other people, sometimes three, sometimes just one, but usually you want at least two reviews. So they will send it to two other people. Now, this is where the double-blind component comes in. I have to send it in without any identifying information on it, right? So not only do I not put my name on the article itself, I don't put it in the file name. I should send in a clean copy because Microsoft Word, in its sort of, I don't know if metadata is quite the right term for it, but Microsoft Word, in the properties of that document, will tell you who created it, and you can save a copy that erases that, which is best practice for this kind of work, right? So the premise is that when those two reviewers get my article, there is no way that they can trace it back to me. Similarly, if I referenced myself, if I cited an earlier article by myself, what I should do is either just refer to myself by last name as though I were citing any other source. That's one way of approaching it. Or leave that citation out, right? Just put, like, I don't know, self-citation or something like that, author, citation to the author, whatever it is, right? You can do something like that. That's a little more questionable, but there's different ways of doing it. Personally, I've never done it, so it's not a thing that I have run into, as far as I remember. Anyway, so the premise of all of this is that when they go to review the article, what they are looking at is the article itself and the argument that it's making. They're not assessing me, right? So maybe those people know me. Statistically, they probably don't, but maybe those people know me. Maybe they've read my work. Maybe we've met at a conference. Maybe we're BFFs or something like this, right? And they do not know. Similarly, maybe they hate me. Maybe I wrote a review where I trashed their book that was their passion project, and now they've sworn vengeance on me, right? Doesn't matter because they don't know that I wrote it. All they know is what they have in front of them. The second, so that's one version of single blind, right? So the double blind component comes in where I do not know who they are. The journal does not ask me if I'm okay with them reviewing my work. It does not tell me their names, that they are the ones who gave me feedback. What I get from them via the sort of intermediary of the journal is their feedback on the article. So the reviewers will read it, they will make their comments, make their suggestion about publication or not, send that to the journal then sends it to me. That's what I get, and I don't know who they are, right? So this is the double blind component. And again, this is to sort of protect the legitimacy of the process. So this is what goes on. The people who get chosen to peer review. Now I'm going to tell you how the process is supposed to work. There are some caveats that I will talk about because of the way that contemporary scholarly publishing works. But what in principle happens is the journal will identify two people who are experts in this field. Whatever field I am writing about, they will find two other people out in the world who are experts on that subject. How that expertise is determined varies widely. It also depends on who agrees to do this work, because this is uncompensated labor that academics and scholars do. And I've done a lot of it. I've peer-reviewed a lot of articles, and I've never gotten paid for it. I spend time doing that. Everybody who reviews my articles spends time doing that and does not get compensated, generally. There's some journals where, like, they will give you a discount on a subscription or whatever it is, right? But generally nothing. So, two experts, 1 to 3 experts, usually 2, looks at this article, and they will basically give their feedback. So the one universal component of that feedback is a publication recommendation. So that's usually some variation of publish this as is, which still often will go through copy editing, publish with minor revisions, which means there's bits and pieces that need to be a little bit cleaned up, but there's no major problems that would prevent it from being ready for publication. Publish with major revisions, and that can be anything from there are huge fundamental problems with the way that this data is being dealt with, the way that the argument is structured, whatever it is, right? There's big problems. This is not really that close to ready for publication. It needs substantial work before it would get there. And then there's reject outright, which basically means either we don't see any value in this whatsoever, or we think the problems with it are so significant that it is not practical for the author to rewrite this in such a way that it will be publication worthy. So those are your basic potentials, right? Accepted as is, minor revisions, major revisions, rejection. Different journals have different schemas, but they're all roughly in that sort of vein. Some have 3 options, some have 5, some have others, right? And then the reviewers will give feedback. What feedback they give will vary partially by the journal and partially by the reviewer. So usually you get a few paragraphs of global comments. So that's overall feedback responding to the entire argument as a whole. Some people will do line comments or line notes. I tend to do that, especially if it is something where there's a lot of grammar and mechanics issues that will need to be corrected, I tend to do that. And some journals will have specific sets of questions that you need to respond to as a reviewer. So those may be things like, is this article properly referenced? Is it citing the most recent scholarship in the field? Has the article properly presented its data for this discipline, right? So, for instance, I've reviewed for a lot of journals through MDPI, which is a publishing conglomerate that publishes a ton of different scholarly journals, and they have a generic review thing that is really built for the sciences, not for the humanities, and so a lot of their questions are sort of shaped around scientific writing rather than humanities writing. But this is the sort of thing, right? Is they ask about these specific things. Often they will ask about the quality of the English grammar and mechanics, these sorts of things. And some journals will have you rate them quantitatively, whether that's like a scale of 1 to 5 or poor, fair, medium, good, excellent, whatever it is, not applicable, these kinds of things. So some journals will do that. Some journals will just say, send us your feedback. And so you send them whatever it is that you send them as feedback to this article. But this is the peer reviewing component, right? Is you have someone who's an expert in the field. They provide feedback based on their knowledge of the field, their understanding of the discipline and disciplinary conventions, their understanding of the current state of the field, by which I mean the broad scope of knowledge that is currently accepted within the discipline as legitimate, reliable, trustworthy, etc. And from there, the journal makes a decision. The editors of the journal make a decision about what to do with this article. Sometimes you will get one reviewer who's like, this is great, I think it's ready for publication, and you get another reviewer, and there's sort of a lot of jokes about reviewer 2, who is stereotypically cruel, evil, short-sighted, and unwilling to give the author any benefit of the doubt or leeway whatsoever. So maybe reviewer 2 is like, this has major problems that need to be resolved, right? So you got these two very different reviews. The journal editors have to figure out some way of balancing that. Sometimes they will seek out a third reviewer. I've had that happen with my work. Sometimes they will say, we're going to lean toward one side or the other based on what we as editors think, whatever it is. So, there's a couple of big things that are also worth being aware of here. But that's basically how the process is supposed to work. And again, the fact that it's done by experts in the field who know what they are doing and know how to write scholarship, have a track record of scholarly publication, etc., means that you are supposed to have relatively high quality, trustworthy, reliable data in these scholarly publications. The fact that it's done through double-blind processes means that theoretically the process should be trustworthy because it's not personally motivated. There are no conflicts of interest. But there are some problems here. One problem with academic peer review is, in fact, places like MDPI, which is basically a publication factory. And I've published with MDPI. I don't inherently have a problem with them. I think a lot of the stuff that they publish is quite good. Especially in the issues I've special guest edited. But because they publish dozens of articles a day, maybe more than that, I don't know for sure, they publish massive amounts of information, massive numbers of articles per day. they inherently need to move through the process quickly. And that is one of the things MDPI guarantees. And some journals do this. They will guarantee you, more or less, that they will try and respond within X amount of time. Some journals don't, and you wait years to hear back. That's happened to me as well. But because places like MDPI publish so much content, such a large number of articles, one big problem you run into is needing to find reviewers for them. And there are a limited number of experts on many fields, right? And there are a limited number of people who are willing to continue doing uncompensated labor for this. And so you do sometimes get a stretching of the definition of experts, right? You get, and I mean, I don't want to sort of pretend I'm entirely innocent in this, because I have reviewed articles that are tangential to my actual scholarly interests. And I've refused to review articles that I don't think I have the expertise or the ability to comment on meaningfully, right? But this becomes one of the things, right? Is if there's not very many, especially for things like So I'll give you an example of this. I recently reviewed an article for RIDE, which is Research in Dramatic Education. And the article was about theater for development in Nigeria. And I've written about Nigerian drama. I've published about Nigerian drama. It's something I think is really, really cool, and I know a decent amount about it. I don't know anything about theater for development, but I know Nigerian drama. So I said, okay, yeah, I'm happy to review this for you. And I reviewed it, and I gave it a good review, I think. It wasn't positive. I was critical of it for the reasons it needed to be critiqued, but I gave it a thorough review, I'll say. But this becomes one of the things, right, is because you have a limited pool of people to draw on for many subjects, you depend to a certain extent on people to self-identify and people to be willing to review things for generally no compensation. And for many scholars, that is time that they could spend on something else, i.e. their own work, or teaching, writing, spending time with their family, whatever else they do in their lives, right? So this becomes one of the problems, is it becomes very hard to find people who review things, and so you depend on getting whoever you can get to a certain extent in order to do these reviews. And this is complicated by the fact that the people who edit these journals are often not specialists in the particular subfield that the article itself is in, right? So if I send something to PMLA, I don't know who the current editors of PMLA are, but chances are that if I send an article about contemporary modern Irish drama, right? I'm going to be working on an article on that in the coming year. If I send that to them, chances are the person who edits PMLA is not a specialist in contemporary Northern Irish drama. And so they don't necessarily know who the best people in the field to ask are going to be anyway, right? So this becomes there's a compounding component to this. Now, this is not to say that peer review is therefore unreliable or untrustworthy. It is not. It is, in fact, a really, really good mechanism. It is not a foolproof mechanism. But the thing that peer review does better than, I would say, pretty much any other metric available to us as scholars is it ensures that there is quality control. Again, it's not foolproof, but having other people who are specialists in the area check over our work and make sure it is trustworthy, reliable, that our methodology is sound, that the logic of our arguments all hold up to scrutiny, etc., is a very, very good technique for ensuring high-quality information makes it into print, as opposed to low-quality information that you might find on, say, a personal blog or through a self-published article or book or whatever it is, where there isn't that quality control mechanism in place.